Bill Clinton. William Jefferson Clinton, née Blythe Roman III, born August 19, 1946, is an American politician who served as the 42nd President of the United States from 1993 to 2001. He previously served as governor of Arkansas from 1979 to 1981 and again from 1983 to 1992, and as Attorney General of Arkansas from 1977 to 1979. A member of the Democratic Party, Clinton became known as a New Democrat, as many of his policies reflected a centrist third-way political philosophy. He is the husband of Hillary Clinton, who was a senator from New York from 2001 to 2009, Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, and the Democratic nominee for president in the 2016 presidential election. Clinton was born and raised in Arkansas and attended Georgetown University. He received a Rhodes Scholarship to study at University College, Oxford, and he later graduated from Yale Law School. He met Hillary Rodham at Yale. They married in 1975. After graduating from law school, Clinton returned to Arkansas and won election as state attorney general, followed by 2 non-consecutive terms as Arkansas governor. As governor, he overhauled the state's education system and served as chairman of the National Governors Association. Clinton was elected president in the 1992 presidential election, defeating incumbent Republican President George H.W. Bush and independent businessman Ross Perot. At 46 years old, he became the third youngest president of the United States. Clinton presided over the longest period of peacetime economic expansion in American history. He signed into law the North American Free Trade Agreement (NAFTA) and the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, but failed to pass his plan for national health care reform. In the 1994 elections, the Republican Party won unified control of Congress for the first time in 40 years. However, Clinton was re-elected in the 1996 with a landslide victory. Starting in the mid-1990s, he began an ideological evolution as he became much more conservative in his domestic policy, advocating for welfare reform and the state children's health insurance program, as well as financial deregulation measures. He also appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer to the U.S. Supreme Court. During the last 3 years of Clinton's presidency, the Congressional Budget Office reported a budget surplus, the first such surplus since 1969. In foreign policy, Clinton ordered U.S. military intervention in the Bosnian and Kosovo wars, signed the Dayton Peace Agreement. He also called for the expansion of NATO in Eastern Europe, and many former Warsaw Pact members joined NATO during his presidency. Clinton's foreign policy in the Middle East saw him sign the Iraq Liberation Act, which gave aid to groups against Saddam Hussein. He also participated in the Oslo I Accord and Camp David summit to advance the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and assisted the Northern Ireland peace process. Clinton's second term would be dominated by the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which began in 1996 when he began a sexual affair with 22-year-old White House intern Monica Lewinsky. In January 1998, news of the sexual relationship made tabloid headlines. The scandal escalated throughout the year, culminating on December 19 when Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives, becoming the second U.S. president to be impeached after Andrew Johnson. The 2 impeachment articles that the House passed were centered around Clinton using the powers of the presidency to obstruct the investigation, and that he lied under oath. In 1999, Clinton's impeachment trial began in the Senate. Clinton was acquitted on both charges as the Senate failed to cast 67 votes against him, the conviction threshold. Clinton left office in 2001 with the highest end-of-term approval rating of any U.S. president since Franklin D. Roosevelt. His presidency has been ranked among the upper tier in historical rankings of U.S. presidents. However, his personal conduct and allegations of sexual assault against him have made him the subject of substantial scrutiny. Since leaving office, he has been involved in public speaking and humanitarian work. He created the Clinton Foundation to address international causes such as the prevention of HIV/AIDS and global warming. In 2009, he was named the United Nations Special Envoy to Haiti. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, Clinton and George W. Bush formed the Clinton-Bush-Haiti Fund. He has remained active in Democratic Party politics, campaigning for his wife's 2008 and 2016 presidential campaigns. Early life and career. Clinton was born William Jefferson Blythe Roman III on August 19, 1946, at Julia Chester Hospital in Hope, Arkansas. He is the son of William Jefferson Blythe Jr., a traveling salesman who had died in an automobile accident 3 months before his birth, and Virginia Dell Cassidy, later Virginia Kelly. His parents had married on September 4, 1943, but this union later proved to be bigamous, as Blythe was still married to his third wife. Virginia traveled to New Orleans to study nursing soon after Bill was born, leaving him in Hope with her parents Eldridge and Edith Cassidy, who owned and ran a small grocery store. At a time when the southern United States was racially segregated, Clinton's grandparents sold goods on credit to people of all races. In 1950, Bill's mother returned from nursing school and married Roger Clinton Sr., who co-owned an automobile dealership in Hot Springs, Arkansas, with his brother and Earl T. Ricks. The family moved to Hot Springs in 1950. Although he immediately assumed use of his stepfather's surname, it was not until Clinton turned 15 that he formally adopted the surname Clinton as a gesture toward him. Clinton has described his stepfather as a gambler and an alcoholic who regularly abused his mother and half-brother, Roger Clinton Jr. He threatened his stepfather with violence multiple times to protect them. In Hot Springs, Clinton attended St. John's Catholic Elementary School, Ramble Elementary School, and Hot Springs High School, where he was an active student leader, avid reader, and musician. Clinton was in the chorus and played the tenor saxophone, winning first chair in the state band's saxophone section. He briefly considered dedicating his life to music, but as he noted in his autobiography My Life, Clinton began an interest in law at Hot Springs High when he took up the challenge to argue the defense of the ancient Roman senator Catiline in a mock trial in his Latin class. After a vigorous defense that made use of his budding rhetorical and political skills, he told the Latin teacher Elizabeth Buck it made him realize that someday he would study law. Clinton has identified two influential moments in his life, both occurring in 1963, that contributed to his decision to become a public figure. One was his visit as a Boys Nation senator to the White House to meet President John F. Kennedy. The other was watching Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 I Have a Dream speech on TV, which impressed him so much that he later memorized it. College and law school years. Georgetown University. With the aid of scholarships, Clinton attended the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., receiving a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service degree in 1968. Georgetown was the only school where Clinton applied. In 1964 and 1965, Clinton won elections for class president. From 1964 to 1967, he was an intern and then a clerk in the office of Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright. While in college, he became a Brother of Service fraternity Alpha Phi Omega and was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. Clinton was also a member of the Order of Damale, a youth group affiliated with Freemasonry, but he never became a Freemason. He is a member of Kappa Kappa Psi honorary band fraternity. Oxford. Upon graduating from Georgetown in 1968, Clinton won a Rhodes Scholarship to University College, Oxford, where he initially read for a B.Phil in philosophy, politics, and economics, but transferred to a B.Lit in politics and, ultimately, a B.Phil in politics. Clinton did not expect to return for the second year because of the draft, and so he switched programs. This type of activity was common among other Rhodes scholars from his cohort. He had received an offer to study at Yale Law School, Yale University, and so he left early to return to the United States and did not receive a degree from Oxford. During his time at Oxford, Clinton befriended fellow American Rhodes scholar Frank Aller. In 1969, Aller received a draft letter. Aller's 1971 suicide had an influential impact on Clinton. British writer and feminist Sarah Maitland said of Clinton, "I remember Bill and Frank Aller taking me to a pub in Walton Street in the summer term of 1969 and talking to me about the Vietnam War. I knew nothing about it. And when Frank began to describe the napalming of civilians, I began to cry." Bill said that feeling bad wasn't good enough. That was. Clinton was a member of the Oxford University Basketball Club and also played for Oxford University's rugby union team. While Clinton was president in 1994, he received an honorary degree and a fellowship from the University of Oxford, specifically for being a doughty and tireless champion of the cause of world peace, having a powerful collaborator in his wife, and for winning general applause for his achievement of resolving the gridlock that prevented an agreed budget. Vietnam War opposition and draft controversy. During the Vietnam War, Clinton received educational draft deferments while he was in England in 1968 and 1969. While at Oxford, he participated in Vietnam War protests and organized a moratorium to end the war in Vietnam event in October 1969. He was planning to attend law school in the U.S. and knew he might lose his deferment. Clinton tried unsuccessfully to obtain positions in the National Guard and the Air Force Officer Candidate School, and he then made arrangements to join the Reserve Officers Training Corps ROT program at the University of Arkansas. He subsequently decided not to join the ROT, saying in a letter to the officer in charge of the program that he opposed the war but did not think it was honorable to use ROT, National Guard or Reserve service, to avoid serving in Vietnam. He further stated that because he opposed the war, he would not volunteer to serve in uniform, but would subject himself to the draft and would serve if selected only as a way to maintain my political viability within the system. Clinton registered for the draft and received a high number 311, meaning that those whose birthdays had been drawn as numbers 1 to 310 would be drafted before him, making it unlikely he would be called up. In fact, the highest number drafted was 195. Colonel Eugene Holmes, the Army officer who had been involved with Clinton's ROT application, suspected that Clinton attempted to manipulate the situation to avoid the draft and avoid serving in uniform. He issued a notarized statement during the 1992 presidential campaign. During the 1992 campaign, it was revealed that Clinton's uncle had attempted to secure him a position in the Navy Reserve, which would have prevented him from being deployed to Vietnam. This effort was unsuccessful, and Clinton said in 1992 that he had been unaware of it until then. Although legal, Clinton's actions with respect to the draft and deciding whether to serve in the military were criticized during his first presidential campaign by conservatives and some Vietnam veterans, some of whom charged that he had used Fulbright's influence to avoid military service. Clinton's 1992 campaign manager, James Carville, successfully argued that Clinton's letter in which he declined to join the ROT should be made public, insisting that voters, many of whom had also opposed the Vietnam War, would understand and appreciate his position. Law School. After Oxford, Clinton attended Yale Law School and earned a Juris Doctor J.D. degree in 1973. In 1971, he met his future wife, Hillary Rodham, in the Yale Law Library. She was a class year ahead of him. They began dating and were soon inseparable. After only about a month, the couple continued living together in New Haven when they returned to law school. Clinton eventually moved to Texas with Rodham in 1972 to take a job leading McGovern's effort there. He spent considerable time in Dallas at the campaign's local headquarters on Lemon Avenue, where he had an office. Clinton worked with future two-term mayor of Dallas Ron Kirk, future governor of Texas Ann Richards, and then unknown television director and filmmaker Steven Spielberg. Governor of Arkansas 1979, 1981, 1983, 1992. After graduating from Yale Law School, Clinton returned to Arkansas and became a law professor at the University of Arkansas. In 1974, he ran for the House of Representatives. Running in the conservative 3rd District against incumbent Republican John Paul Hammerschmidt, Clinton's campaign was bolstered by the anti-Republican and anti-incumbent mood resulting from the Watergate scandal. Hammerschmidt, who had received 77% of the vote in 1972, defeated Clinton by only a 52% to 48% margin. In 1976, Clinton ran for Arkansas Attorney General. With only minor opposition in the primary and no opposition at all in the general election, Clinton was elected. In 1978, Clinton entered the Arkansas gubernatorial primary. At just 31 years old, he was one of the youngest gubernatorial candidates in the state's history. Clinton was elected governor of Arkansas in 1978, having defeated the Republican candidate Lynn Lowe, a farmer from Texarkana. Clinton was only 32 years old when he took office, the youngest governor in the country at the time, and the second youngest governor in the history of Arkansas. Due to his youthful appearance, Clinton was often called the boy governor. He worked on educational reform and directed the maintenance of Arkansas's roads, with wife Hillary leading a successful committee on urban health care reform. However, his term included an unpopular motor vehicle tax and citizens' anger over the escape of Cuban refugees from the Mariel boatlift detained in Fort Chaffee in 1980. Monroe Schwarzlose, of Kingsland in Cleveland County, polled 31% of the vote against Clinton in the Democratic gubernatorial primary of 1980. Some suggested Schwarzlose's unexpected voter turnout foreshadowed Clinton's defeat by Republican challenger Frank D. White in the general election that year. As Clinton once joked, he was the youngest ex-governor in the nation's history. Clinton joined friend Bruce Lindsay's Little Rock law firm of Wright, Lindsay and Jennings. In 1982, he was elected governor a second time and kept the office for 10 years. Effective with the 1986 election, Arkansas had changed its gubernatorial term of office from 2 to 4 years. During his term, he helped transform Arkansas's economy and improved the state's educational system. For senior citizens, he removed the sales tax from medications and increased the home property tax exemption. He became a leading figure among the New Democrats, a group of Democrats who advocated welfare reform, smaller government, and other policies not supported by liberals. Formally organized as the Democratic Leadership Council (DLC), the New Democrats argued that in light of President Ronald Reagan's landslide victory in 1984, the Democratic Party needed to adopt a more centrist political stance in order to succeed at the national level. Clinton delivered the Democratic response to Reagan's 1985 State of the Union address and served as chair of the National Governors Association from 1986 to 1987, bringing him to an audience beyond Arkansas. In the early 1980s, Clinton made reform of the Arkansas education system a top priority of his gubernatorial administration. The Arkansas Education Standards Committee was chaired by Clinton's wife Hillary, who was also an attorney, as well as the chair of the Legal Services Corporation. The committee transformed Arkansas's education system. Proposed reforms included more spending for schools supported by a sales tax increase, better opportunities for gifted children, vocational education, higher teachers' salaries, more course variety, and compulsory teacher competency exams. The reforms passed in September 1983, after Clinton called a special legislative session the longest in Arkansas history. Many have considered this the greatest achievement of the Clinton governorship. He defeated 4 Republican candidates for governor, Lowe 1978, White 1982 and 1986, Jonesboro businessman Woody Freeman 1984, and Sheffield Nelson of Little Rock 1990. Also in the 1980s, the Clintons' personal and business affairs included transactions that became the basis of the Whitewater controversy investigation, which later dogged his presidential administration. After extensive investigation over several years, no indictments were made against the Clintons related to the years in Arkansas. According to some sources, Clinton was a death penalty opponent in his early years, but he eventually switched positions. However, he might have felt previously, by 1992, Clinton was insisting that Democrats should no longer feel guilty about protecting the innocent. During Clinton's final term as governor, Arkansas performed its first execution since 1964. The death penalty had been reinstated in 1976. As governor, he oversaw the first 4 executions carried out by the state of Arkansas since the death penalty was reinstated there in 1976, 1 by electric chair and 3 by lethal injection. To draw attention to his stance on capital punishment, Clinton flew home to Arkansas mid-campaign in 1992 in order to affirm in person that the controversial execution of Ricky Ray Rector would go forward as scheduled. 1988 Democratic presidential primaries. In 1987, the media speculated that Clinton would enter the presidential race after incumbent New York Governor Mario Cuomo declined to run and Democratic frontrunner Gary Hart withdrew owing to revelations of multiple Mar. Clinton decided to remain as Arkansas governor following consideration for the potential candidacy of Hillary for governor, initially favored but ultimately vetoed by the First Lady. For the nomination, Clinton endorsed Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis. He gave the nationally televised opening night address at the 1988 Democratic National Convention, but his speech, which was 33 minutes long and twice the length it was expected to be, was criticized for being too long and poorly delivered. Clinton presented himself both as a moderate and as a member of the new Democrat wing of the Democratic Party, and he headed the Moderate Democratic Leadership Council in 1990 and 1991. Presidential campaigns. 1992. In the first primary contest, the Iowa caucus, Clinton finished a distant third to Iowa Senator Tom Harkin. During the campaign for the New Hampshire primary, reports surfaced that Clinton had engaged in an extramarital affair with Jennifer Flowers. Clinton fell far behind former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas in the New Hampshire polls. Following Super Bowl Roman XXVI, Clinton and his wife Hillary went on 60 Minutes to rebuff the charges. Their television appearance was a calculated risk, but Clinton regained several delegates. He finished second to Tsongas in the New Hampshire primary, but after trailing badly in the polls and coming within single digits of winning, the media viewed it as a victory. News outlets labeled him the comeback kid for earning a firm second-place finish. Winning the big prizes of Florida and Texas and many of the southern primaries on Super Tuesday gave Clinton a sizable delegate lead. However, former California Governor Jerry Brown was scoring victories, and Clinton had yet to win a significant contest outside his native South. With no major southern state remaining, Clinton targeted New York, which had many delegates. He scored a resounding victory in New York City, shedding his image as a regional candidate. Having been transformed into the consensus candidate, he secured the Democratic Party nomination, finishing with a victory in Jerry Brown's home state of California. During the campaign, questions of conflict of interest regarding state business and the politically powerful Rhodes law firm, at which Hillary Rodham Clinton was a partner, arose. Clinton argued the questions were moot because all transactions with the state had been deducted before determining Hillary's firm pay. Further concern arose when Bill Clinton announced that, with Hillary, voters would be getting 2 presidents for the price of 1. Clinton was still the governor of Arkansas while campaigning for U.S. president, and he returned to his home state to see that Ricky Ray Rector would be executed. After killing a police officer and a civilian, Rector shot himself in the head. According to both Arkansas state law and federal law, a seriously mentally impaired inmate cannot be executed. The courts disagreed with the allegation of grave mental impairment and allowed the execution. Clinton's return to Arkansas for the execution was framed in an article for the New York Times as a possible political move to counter soft-on-crime accusations. Bush's approval ratings were around 80% during the Gulf War, and he was described as unbeatable. When Bush compromised with Democrats to try to lower federal deficits, he reneged on his promise not to raise taxes, which hurt his approval rating. Clinton repeatedly condemned Bush for making a promise he failed to keep. By election time, the economy was souring, and Bush saw his approval rating plummet to just slightly over 40%. Finally, conservatives were previously united by anti-communism, but with the end of the Cold War, the party lacked a uniting issue. When Pat Buchanan and Pat Robertson addressed Christian themes at the Republican National Convention with Bush criticizing Democrats for omitting God from their platform, many moderates were alienated. Clinton then pointed to his moderate, New Democrat record as governor of Arkansas, though some on the more liberal side of the party remained suspicious. Many Democrats who had supported Ronald Reagan and Bush in previous elections switched their support to Clinton. Clinton and his running mate, Al Gore, toured the country during the final weeks of the campaign, shoring up support and pledging a new beginning. On March 26, 1992, during a Democratic fundraiser of the presidential campaign, Robert Rafsky confronted then-Gov. Bill Clinton of Arkansas and asked what he was going to do about AIDS, to which Clinton replied, "I feel your pain." The televised exchange led to AIDS becoming an issue in the 1992 presidential election. On April 4, then-candidate Clinton met with members of ACT UP and other leading AIDS advocates to discuss his AIDS agenda and agreed to make a major AIDS policy speech, to have people with HIV speak to the Democratic Convention, and to sign onto the AIDS United Action 5-point plan. Clinton won the 1992 presidential election 370 electoral votes against Republican incumbent George H.W. Bush 168 electoral votes and billionaire populist Ross Perot 0 electoral votes, who ran as an independent on a platform that focused on domestic issues. Bush's steep decline in public approval was a significant part of Clinton's success. Clinton's victory in the election ended 12 years of Republican rule of the White House and 20 of the previous 24 years. The election gave Democrats full control of the United States Congress, the first time one party controlled both the executive and legislative branches since Democrats held the 96th United States Congress during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. According to Seymour Martin Lipset, the 1992 election had several unique characteristics. Voters felt that economic conditions were worse than they actually were, which harmed Bush. A rare event was the presence of a strong third-party candidate. Liberals launched a backlash against 12 years of a conservative White House. The chief factor was Clinton's uniting his party and winning over a number of heterogeneous groups. 1996. In the 1996 presidential election, Clinton was re-elected, receiving 49.2% of the popular vote over Republican Bob Dole 40.7% of the popular vote, and Reform candidate Ross Perot 8.4% of the popular vote. Clinton received 379 of the Electoral College votes, with Dole receiving 159 electoral votes. With his victory, he became the first Democrat to win 2 consecutive presidential elections since Franklin D. Roosevelt. Presidency 1993-2001. Clinton's third wave of moderate liberalism built up the nation's fiscal health and put the nation on a firm footing abroad amid globalization and the development of anti-American terrorist organizations. During his presidency, Clinton advocated for a wide variety of legislation and programs, most of which were enacted into law or implemented by the executive branch. His policies, particularly the North American Free Trade Agreement and welfare reform, have been attributed to a centrist third-way philosophy of governance. His policy of fiscal conservatism helped to reduce deficits on budgetary matters. Clinton presided over the longest period of peacetime economic expansion in American history. The Congressional Budget Office reported budget surpluses of $69 billion in 1998, $126 billion in 1999, and $236 billion in 2000 during the last 3 years of Clinton's presidency. Over the years of the recorded surplus, the gross national debt rose each year. At the end of the fiscal year September 30 for each of the years a surplus was recorded. The U.S. Treasury reported a gross debt of $5.413 trillion in 1997, $5.526 trillion in 1998, $5.656 trillion in 1999, and $5.674 over the same period. The Office of Management and Budget reported an end-of-year December 31 gross debt of $5.369 trillion in 1997, $5.478 trillion in 1998, $5.606 in 1999, and $5.629 trillion in 2000. At the end of his presidency, the Clintons moved to 15 Old House Lane in Chappaqua, New York, in order to satisfy a residency requirement for his wife to win election as a U.S. Senator from New York. First term 1993-1997. Clinton was inaugurated as the 42nd President of the United States on January 20, 1993. Clinton was physically exhausted at the time and had an inexperienced staff. His high levels of public support dropped in the first few weeks as he made a series of mistakes. His first choice for Attorney General had not paid her taxes on babysitters and was forced to withdraw. The second appointee also withdrew for the same reason. Clinton had repeatedly promised to encourage gays in the military service, despite what he knew to be the strong opposition of the military leadership. He tried anyway, and was publicly opposed by the top generals and forced by Congress to a compromise position of don't ask, don't tell, whereby gays could serve if and only if they kept it secret. He devised a $16 billion stimulus package primarily to aid inner-city programs desired by liberals, but it was defeated by a Republican filibuster in the Senate. His popularity at the 100-day mark of his term was the lowest of any president at that point. Public opinion did support one liberal program, and Clinton signed the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, which required large employers to allow employees to take unpaid leave for pregnancy or a serious medical condition. This action had bipartisan support and was popular with the public. 2 days after taking office, on January 22, 1993, the 20th anniversary of the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade, Clinton reversed restrictions on domestic and international family planning programs that had been imposed by Reagan and Bush. Clinton said abortion should be kept safe, legal, and rare, a slogan that had been suggested by political scientist Samuel L. Popkin and first used by Clinton in December 1991. During the 8 years of the Clinton administration, the abortion rate declined by 18%. On February 15, 1993, Clinton made his first address to the nation, announcing his plan to raise taxes to close a budget deficit. 2 days later, in a nationally televised address to a joint session of Congress, Clinton unveiled his economic plan. The plan focused on reducing the deficit rather than on cutting taxes for the middle class, which had been high on his campaign agenda. Clinton's advisers pressured him to raise taxes based on the theory that a smaller federal budget deficit would reduce bond interest rates. President Clinton's Attorney General Janet Reno authorized the FBI use of armored vehicles to deploy tear gas into the buildings of the Branch Davidian community near Waco, Texas, in hopes of ending a 51-day siege. During the operation on April 19, 1993, the buildings caught fire and 75 of the residents died, including 24 children. The raid had originally been planned by the Bush administration. Clinton had played no role. On May 19, 1993, Clinton fired 7 employees of the White House Travel Office. This caused the White House Travel Office controversy, even though the travel office staff served at the pleasure of the president and could be dismissed without cause. The White House responded to the controversy by claiming that the firings were done in response to financial improprieties that had been revealed by a brief FBI investigation. Critics contended that the firings had been done to allow friends of the Clintons to take over the travel business, and the involvement of the FBI was unwarranted. In August, Clinton signed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993, which passed Congress without a Republican vote. It cut taxes for 15 million low-income families, made tax cuts available to 90% of small businesses, and raised taxes on the wealthiest 1.2% of taxpayers. Additionally, it mandated that the budget be balanced over many years through the implementation of spending restraints. On September 22, 1993, Clinton made a major speech to Congress regarding a health care reform plan, the program aimed at achieving universal coverage through a national health care plan. This was one of the most prominent items on Clinton's legislative agenda and resulted from a task force headed by Hillary Clinton. The plan was well received in political circles, but it was eventually doomed by well-organized lobby opposition from conservatives, the American Medical Association, and the health insurance industry. However, Clinton biographer John F. Harris said the program failed because of a lack of coordination within the White House. Despite the Democratic majority in Congress, the effort to create a national health care system ultimately died when compromise legislation by George J. Mitchell failed to gain a majority of support in August 1994. The failure of the bill was the first major legislative defeat of the Clinton administration. In November 1993, David Hale, the source of criminal allegations against Bill Clinton in the Whitewater controversy, alleged that while governor of Arkansas, Clinton pressured Hale to provide an illegal $300,000 loan to Susan McDougal, the Clintons' partner in the Whitewater land deal. A U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission investigation resulted in convictions against the McDougals for their role in the Whitewater project, but the Clintons themselves were never charged, and Clinton maintains his and his wife's innocence in the affair. On November 30, 1993, Clinton signed into law the Brady Bill, which mandated federal background checks on people who purchase firearms in the United States. The law also imposed a 5-day waiting period on purchases until the NICS system was implemented in 1998. He also expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit, a subsidy for low-income workers. In December of the same year, allegations by Arkansas State Troopers Larry Patterson and Roger Perry were first reported by David Brock in the American Spectator. In the affair later known as Troopergate, the officers alleged that they had arranged sexual liaisons for Clinton back when he was governor of Arkansas. The story mentioned a woman named Paula, a reference to Paula Jones. Brock later apologized to Clinton, saying the article was politically motivated bad journalism and that the troopers were greedy and had slimy motives. That month, Clinton implemented a Department of Defense directive known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which allowed gay men and women to serve in the armed services provided they kept their sexual preferences a secret. The act forbade the military from inquiring about an individual's sexual orientation. The policy was developed as a compromise after Clinton's proposal to allow gays to serve openly in the military met staunch opposition from prominent congressional Republicans and Democrats, including Senators John McCain RAZ and Sam Nunn DGA. According to David Mixner, Clinton's support for the compromise led to a heated dispute with Vice President Al Gore, who felt that the president should lift the ban, even though his executive order was sure to be overridden by the Congress. Some gay rights advocates criticized Clinton for not going far enough and accused him of making his campaign promise to get votes and contributions. Their position was that Clinton should have integrated the military by executive order, noting that President Harry S. Truman used executive order to racially desegregate the armed forces. Clinton's defenders argued that an executive order might have prompted the Senate to write the exclusion of gays into law, potentially making it harder to integrate the military in the future. Later in his presidency, in 1999, Clinton criticized the way the policy was implemented, saying he did not think any serious person could say it was not out of whack. The policy remained controversial and was finally repealed in 2011, removing open sexual orientation as a reason for dismissal from the armed forces. On January 1, 1994, Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement into law. Throughout his first year in office, Clinton consistently supported ratification of the treaty by the U.S. Senate. Clinton and most of his allies in the Democratic Leadership Committee strongly supported free trade measures. There remained, however, strong disagreement within the party. Opposition came chiefly from anti-trade Republicans, protectionist Democrats, and supporters of Ross Perot. The bill passed the House with 234 votes in favor and 200 votes opposed, 132 Republicans and 102 Democrats in favor, 156 Democrats, 43 Republicans, and 1 independent opposed. The treaty was then ratified by the Senate and signed into law by the President. The Omnibus Crime Bill, which Clinton signed into law in September 1994, made many changes to U.S. crime and law enforcement legislation, including the expansion of the death penalty to include crimes not resulting in death, such as running a large-scale drug enterprise. During Clinton's re-election campaign, he said, "My 1994 crime bill expanded the death penalty for drug kingpins, murderers of federal law enforcement officers, and nearly 60 additional categories of violent felons." It also included a subsection of assault weapons ban for a 10-year period. On October 21, 1994, the Clinton administration launched the first official White House website, whitehouse.gov. The site was followed with 3 more versions, resulting in the final edition launched in 2000. The White House website was part of a wider movement of the Clinton administration toward web-based communication. According to Robert Longley, Clinton and Gore were responsible for pressing almost all federal agencies, the U.S. court system, and the U.S. military onto the Internet, thus opening up America's government. A speech delivered by President Bill Clinton at the December 6, 1995 White House Conference on HIV/AIDS projected that a cure for AIDS and a vaccine to prevent further infection would be developed. The president focused on his administration's accomplishments and efforts related to the epidemic, including an accelerated drug approval process. He also condemned homophobia and discrimination against people with HIV. Clinton announced 3 new initiatives, creating a special working group to coordinate AIDS research throughout the federal government, convening public health experts to develop an action plan that integrates HIV prevention with substance abuse prevention, and launching a new effort by the Department of Justice to ensure that health care facilities provide equal access to people. The White House FBI files controversy of June 1996 arose concerning improper access by the White House to FBI security clearance documents. Craig Livingstone, head of the White House Office of Personnel Security, improperly requested and received from the FBI background report files without asking permission of the subject individuals. Many of these were employees of former Republican administrations. In March 2000, independent counsel Robert Ray determined that there was no credible evidence of any crime. Ray's report further stated, "There was no substantial and credible evidence that any senior White House official was involved in seeking the files." On September 21, 1996, Clinton signed into law the Defense of Marriage Act which defined marriage for federal purposes as the legal union of one man and one woman. The legislation allowed individual states to refuse to recognize gay marriages that were performed in other states. Paul Yandura, speaking for the White House Gay and Lesbian Liaison Office, said Clinton's signing DMA was a political decision that they made at the time of a re-election. In defense of his actions, Clinton has said that DMA was intended to head off an attempt to send a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage to the states, a possibility he described as highly likely in the context of a very reactionary Congress. Administration spokesman Richard Socarides said, "The alternatives we knew were going to be far worse, and it was time to move on and get the president re-elected." Clinton himself said DeMau was something which the Republicans put on the ballot to try to get the base vote for Bush up. "I think it's obvious that something had to be done to try to keep the Republican Congress from presenting that." Others were more critical. The veteran gay rights and gay marriage activist Evan Wolfson has called these claims historic revisionism. In a July 2, 2011 editorial, the New York Times opined, "The Defense of Marriage Act was enacted in 1996 as an election year wedge issue, signed by President Bill Clinton in one of his worst policy moments." Ultimately, in United States v. Windsor, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down DeMau in June 2013. Despite DeMau, Clinton was the first president to select openly gay persons for administrative positions, and he is generally credited as being the first president to publicly champion gay rights. During his presidency, Clinton issued two substantially controversial executive orders on behalf of gay rights, the first lifting the ban on security clearances for LGBT federal employees and the second outlawing discrimination based on sexual orientation in the federal civilian workforce. Under Clinton's leadership, federal funding for HIV/AIDS research, prevention, and treatment more than doubled. Clinton also pushed for passing hate crimes laws for gays and for the Private Sector Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which, buoyed by his lobbying, failed to pass the Senate by a single vote in 1996. Advocacy for these issues, paired with the politically unpopular nature of the gay rights movement at the time, led to enthusiastic support for Clinton's election and re-election by the Human Rights Campaign. Clinton came out for gay marriage in July 2009 and urged the Supreme Court to overturn DeMau in 2013. He was later honored by GLAAD for his prior pro-gay stances and his reversal on DeMau. In 1996, United States campaign finance controversy was an alleged effort by China to influence the domestic policies of the United States before and during the Clinton administration, and involved the fundraising practices of the administration itself. Despite the evidence, the Chinese government denied all accusations. As part of a 1996 initiative to curb illegal immigration, Clinton signed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act (IRIRA) on September 30, 1996. Appointed by Clinton, the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform recommended reducing legal immigration from about 800,000 people a year to about 550,000. Ken Gormley, author of The Death of American Virtue, Clinton vs. Starr, reveals in his book that Clinton narrowly escaped possible assassination in the Philippines in November 1996. During his visit to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC Forum in Manila, while he was on his way to meet with a senior member of the Philippine government, Clinton was saved from danger minutes before his motorcade was scheduled to drive over a bridge charged with a timed improvised explosive device IED. According to officials, the IED was large enough to blow up the entire presidential motorcade. Details of the plot were revealed to Gormley by Louis C. Merletti, former member of the Presidential Protection Detail and director of the Secret Service. Intelligence officers intercepted a radio transmission indicating there was a wedding cake under a bridge. This alerted Merletti and others as Clinton's motorcade was scheduled to drive over a major bridge in downtown Manila. Once more, the word wedding was the code name used by a terrorist group for a past assassination attempt. Merletti wanted to reroute the motorcade, but the alternate route would add 45 minutes to the drive time. Clinton was very angry, as he was already late for the meeting, but following the advice of the Secret Service possibly saved his life. Two other bombs had been discovered in Manila earlier in the week, so the threat level that day was high. Security personnel at the Manila International Airport uncovered several grenades and a timing device in a travel bag. Officials also discovered a bomb near a major U.S. naval base. The president was scheduled to visit both these locations later in the week. An intense investigation took place into the events in Manila, and it was discovered that the group behind the bridge bomb was a Saudi terrorist group in Afghanistan known as Al-Qaeda, and the plot was masterminded by Osama bin Laden. Until recently, this thwarted assassination attempt was never made public and remained top secret. Only top members of the U.S. intelligence community were aware of these events. Second term 1997–2001. In the January 1997 State of the Union address, Clinton proposed a new initiative to provide health coverage to up to 5 million children. Senators Ted Kennedy, a Democrat, and Orrin Hatch, a Republican, teamed up with Hillary Rodham Clinton and her staff in 1997 and succeeded in passing legislation forming the state Children's Health Insurance Program (SHIP), the largest successful health care reform in the years of the Clinton presidency. That year, Hillary Clinton shepherded through Congress the Adoption and Safe Families Act, and 2 years later, she succeeded in helping pass the Foster Care Independence Act. Bill Clinton negotiated the passage of the Balanced Budget Act of 1997 by the Republican Congress. In October 1997, he announced he was getting hearing aids due to hearing loss attributed to his age and his time spent as a musician in his youth. In 1999, he signed into law the Financial Services Modernization Act, also known as the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which repealed the part of the Glass-Steagall Act that had prohibited a bank from offering a full range of investment. Impeachment and acquittal. After a House inquiry, Clinton was impeached on December 19, 1998, by the House of Representatives. The House voted 228-206 to impeach him for perjury to a grand jury and voted 221-212 to impeach him for obstruction of justice. Clinton was only the second U.S. president after Andrew Johnson to be impeached. Impeachment proceedings were based on allegations that Clinton had illegally lied about and covered up his relationship with 22-year-old White House and later Department of Defense employee Monica Lewinsky. After the Starr report was submitted to the House providing what it termed substantial and credible information that President Clinton committed acts that may constitute grounds for an impeachment, the House began impeachment hearings against Clinton before the midterm elections. To hold impeachment proceedings, the Republican leadership called a lame duck session in December 1998. While the House Judiciary Committee hearings ended in a straight party line vote, there was lively debate on the House floor. The two charges passed in the House largely with Republican support, but with a handful of Democratic votes as well were for perjury and obstruction of justice. The perjury charge arose from Clinton's testimony before a grand jury that had been convened to investigate perjury he may have committed in his sworn deposition during Jones v. Clinton, Paula Jones's sexual harassment lawsuit. The obstruction charge was based on his actions to conceal his relationship with Lewinsky before and after that deposition. The Senate later acquitted Clinton of both charges. The Senate refused to meet to hold an impeachment trial before the end of the old term, so the trial was held over until the next Congress. Clinton was represented by Washington law firm Williams and Connolly. The Senate finished a 21-day trial on February 12, 1999, with the vote of 55 not guilty/45 guilty on the perjury charge and 50 not guilty/50 guilty on the obstruction of justice charge. Both votes fell short of the constitutional two-thirds majority requirement to convict and remove an officeholder. The final vote was generally along party lines, with no Democrats voting guilty, and only a handful of Republicans voting not guilty. On January 19, 2001, Clinton's law license was suspended for 5 years after he acknowledged to an Arkansas Circuit Court that he had engaged in conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice in the Jones case. Pardons and commutations. Clinton issued 141 pardons and 36 commutations on his last day in office on January 20, 2001. Controversy surrounded Mark Rich and allegations that Hillary Clinton's brother, Hugh Rodham, accepted payments in return for influencing the president's decision-making regarding the pardons. Federal prosecutor Mary Jo White was appointed to investigate the pardon of Rich. She was later replaced by then-Republican James Comey. The investigation found no wrongdoing on Clinton's part. Clinton also pardoned 4 defendants in the Whitewater scandal: Chris Wade, Susan McDougal, Stephen Smith, and Robert W. Palmer, all of whom had ties to Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas. Former Clinton HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, was also among Clinton's pardons. Campaign finance controversies. In February 1997, it was discovered upon documents being released by the Clinton administration that 938 people had stayed at the White House and that 821 of them had made donations. Some donors included Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Jane Fonda, and Judy Collins. Top donors also got golf games and morning jogs with Clinton as a result of the contributions. Janet Reno was called on to investigate the matter by Trent Lott, but she refused. In 1996, it was found that several Chinese foreigners made contributions to Clinton's re-election campaign and the Democratic National Committee with the backing of the People's Republic of China. Some of them also attempted to donate to Clinton's defense fund. This violated United States law forbidding non-American citizens from making campaign contributions. Clinton and Al Gore also allegedly met with the foreign donors. A Republican investigation led by Fred Thompson found that Clinton was targeted by the Chinese government. However, Democratic Senators Joe Lieberman and John Glenn said that the evidence showed that China only targeted congressional elections and not presidential elections. Military and foreign affairs. Somalia. The Battle of Mogadishu occurred in Somalia in 1993. During the operation, 2 U.S. helicopters were shot down by rocket-propelled grenade attacks to their tail rotors, trapping soldiers behind enemy lines. This resulted in an urban battle that killed 18 American soldiers, wounded 73 others, and 1 was taken prisoner. There were many more Somali casualties. Some of the American bodies were dragged through the streets, a spectacle broadcast on television news programs. In response, U.S. forces were withdrawn from Somalia, and later conflicts were approached with fewer soldiers on the ground. Rwanda. In April 1994, genocide broke out in Rwanda. Intelligence reports indicate that Clinton was aware a final solution to eliminate all Tutsis was underway, long before the administration publicly used the word genocide. Fearing a reprisal of the events in Somalia the previous year, Clinton chose not to intervene. Clinton has called his failure to intervene one of his main foreign policy failings, saying, "I don't think we could have ended the violence, but I think we could have cut it down, and I regret it." Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1995, U.S. and NATO aircraft bombed Bosnian Serb targets to halt attacks on UN safe zones and pressure them into a peace accord that would end the Bosnian War. Clinton deployed U.S. peacekeepers to Bosnia in late 1995. Irish peace talks. In 1992, before his presidency, Clinton proposed sending a peace envoy to Northern Ireland, but this was dropped to avoid tensions with the British government. In November 1995, in a ceasefire during the Troubles, Clinton became the first president to visit Northern Ireland, examining both of the 2 divided communities of Belfast. Despite unionist criticism, Clinton used this as a way to negotiate an end to the violent conflict with London, Dublin, the paramilitaries, and the other groups. Clinton went on to play a key role in the peace talks, which produced the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Iran. In February 1996, the Clinton administration agreed to pay Iran $131.08 million, equivalent to $217.49 million in 2020 in settlement to discontinue a case brought in the International Court of Justice after the shooting down of Iran Air Flight 655. Osama bin Laden. Capturing Osama bin Laden had been an objective of the U.S. government during the presidency of Bill Clinton and continued to be until bin Laden's death in 2011. Despite claims by Mansour Ijaz and Sudanese officials that the Sudanese government had offered to arrest and extradite bin Laden and that U.S. authorities rejected each offer, the 9/11 Commission report stated that we have not found any reliable evidence to support the Sudanese claim. In response to a 1996 State Department warning about bin Laden and the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in East Africa by al-Qaeda, which killed 224 people, including 12 Americans, Clinton ordered several military missions to capture or kill bin Laden, all of which were unsuccessful. In August 1998, Clinton ordered cruise missile strikes on terrorist targets in Afghanistan and Sudan, targeting the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, which was suspected of assisting bin Laden in making chemical weapons, and bin Laden's terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. Kosovo. In the midst of a brutal crackdown on ethnic Albanian separatists in the province of Kosovo by the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Clinton authorized the use of U.S. armed forces in a NATO bombing campaign against Yugoslavia in 1999, named Operation Allied Force. The stated reasoning behind the intervention was to stop the ethnic cleansing and what the Clinton administration labeled genocide of Albanians by Yugoslav anti-guerrilla military units. General Wesley Clark was Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and oversaw the mission. With United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244, the bombing campaign ended on June 10, 1999. The resolution placed Kosovo under UN administration and authorized a peacekeeping force to be deployed to the region. NATO announced its soldiers all survived combat, though 2 died in an Apache helicopter crash. Journalists in the popular press criticized genocide statements by the Clinton administration as false and greatly exaggerated. Prior to the bombing campaign on March 24, 1999, common estimates showed that the number of civilians killed in the over-year-long conflict in Kosovo had approximately been 1,800, of which were primarily Albanians, but also Serbs, and that there was no evidence of genocide or ethnic cleansing. In a post-war inquiry, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe noted the patterns of the expulsions and the vast increase in lootings, killings, rape, kidnappings, and pillage once the NATO air war began on March 24. In 2001, the UN-supervised Supreme Court of Kosovo ruled that genocide, the intent to destroy a people, did not take place, but recognized a systematic campaign of terror, including murders, rapes, arsons, and severe maltreatments, with the intention being the forceful departure of the Albanian population. The term ethnic cleansing was used as an alternative to genocide to denote not just ethnically motivated murder, but also displacement, though critics charge there is little difference. Slobodan Milosevic, the president of Yugoslavia at the time of the atrocities, was eventually brought to trial before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague on charges including crimes against humanity and war crimes for his role in the war. He died in 2006 before the completion of the trial. Iraq. In Clinton's 1998 State of the Union address, he warned Congress that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein was building an arsenal of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Clinton signed the Iraq Liberation Act of 1998 on October 31, 1998, which instituted a policy of regime change against Iraq, though it explicitly stated it did not provide for direct intervention on the part of American military forces. The administration then launched a 4-day bombing campaign named Operation Desert Fox, lasting from December 16 to 19, 1998. At the end of this operation, Clinton announced that so long as Saddam remains in power, he will remain a threat to his people, his region, and the world. With our allies, we must pursue a strategy to contain him and to constrain his weapons of mass destruction program while working toward the day Iraq has a government willing to live at peace with its people and with its neighbors. American and British aircraft in the Iraq no-fly zones attacked hostile Iraqi air defenses 166 times in 1999 and 78 times in 2000. China. On October 10, 2000, Clinton signed into law the U.S.-China Relations Act of 2000, which granted permanent, normal trade relations (PNTR) trade status to China. The president asserted that free trade would gradually open China to democratic reform. Relations were damaged briefly by the American bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in May 1999. Clinton apologized for the bombing, stating it was accidental. The U.S.-China Relations Act of 2000 granted China permanent normal trade relations and TR status, previously called Most Favored Nation (MFN), when China becomes a full member of the World Trade Organization (W). The act was signed into law on October 10, 2000 by Clinton. President Clinton in 2000 pushed Congress to approve the U.S.-China trade agreement and China's accession to the WTO, saying that more trade with China would advance America's economic interests. Economically, this agreement is the equivalent of a one-way street. It requires China to open its markets with a fifth of the world's population. Potential Israeli-Palestinian conflict. After initial successes such as the Oslo Accords of the early 1990s, which also led to the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty in 1994, and the Wye River Memorandum in October 1998, Clinton attempted an effort to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He brought Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat together at Camp David for the Camp David Summit in July 2000, which lasted 14 days. Following the failures of the peace talks, Clinton said Arafat had missed the opportunity to facilitate a just and lasting peace. In his autobiography, Clinton blames Arafat for the collapse of the summit. Following another attempt in December 2000 at Bolling Air Force Base, in which the president offered the Clinton parameters, the situation broke down completely after the end of the Taba summit and with the start of the Second Intifada. Judicial appointments. Clinton appointed 2 justices to the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 1993 and Stephen Breyer in 1994. Both justices went on to serve until the 2020s, leaving a lasting judicial legacy for President Clinton. Clinton was the first president in history to appoint more women and minority judges than white male judges to the federal courts. In his 8 years in office, 11.6% of Clinton's Court of Appeals nominees and 17.4% of his district court nominees were black, 32.8% of his Court of Appeals nominees and 28.5% of his district court nominees were women. Public opinion. Throughout Clinton's first term, his job approval rating fluctuated in the 40s and 50s. In his second term, his rating consistently ranged from the high-50s to the high-60s. After his impeachment proceedings in 1998 and 1999, Clinton's rating reached its highest point. According to a CBS News/New York Times poll, Clinton left office with an approval rating of 68%, which matched those of Ronald Reagan and Franklin D. Roosevelt as the highest ratings for departing presidents in the modern era. Clinton's average Gallup poll approval rating for his last quarter in office was 61%, the highest final quarter rating any president has received for 50 years. 47% of the respondents identified themselves as being Clinton supporters. As he was leaving office, a CNN/USA Today/Gallup poll revealed that 45% of Americans said they would miss him, 55% thought he would have something worthwhile to contribute and should remain active in public life, 68% thought he would be remembered more for his involvement in personal scandal than for his accomplishments, and the same percentage said he would be remembered as either outstanding or above average as a president, while 22% said he would be remembered as below average or poor. ABC News characterized public consensus on Clinton as "you can't trust him, he's got weak morals and ethics, and he's done a heck of a good job." In May 2006, a CNN poll comparing Clinton's job performance with that of his successor, George W. Bush, found that a strong majority of respondents said Clinton outperformed Bush in 6 different areas questioned. Gallup polls in 2007 and 2011 showed that Clinton was regarded by 13% of Americans as the greatest president in U.S. history. In 2014, 18% of respondents in a Quinnipiac University Polling Institute poll of American voters regarded Clinton as the best president since World War II, making him the 3rd most popular among post-war presidents behind John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. The same poll showed that just 3% of American voters regarded Clinton as the worst president since World War II. A 2015 poll by the Washington Post asked 162 scholars of the American Political Science Association to rank all the U.S. presidents in order of greatness. According to their findings, Clinton ranked 8th overall with a rating of 70%. Public image. Clinton was the first baby boomer president. Authors Martin Walker and Bob Woodward stated that Clinton's innovative use of soundbite-ready dialogue, personal charisma, and public perception-oriented campaigning were a major factor in his high public approval ratings. When Clinton played the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show, he was described by some religious conservatives as the MTV president. Opponents sometimes referred to him as Slick Willie, a nickname which was first applied to him in 1980 by Pine Bluff commercial journalist Paul Greenberg. Greenberg believed that Clinton was abandoning the progressive policies of previous Arkansas governors, such as Winthrop Rockefeller, Dale Bumpers, and David Pryor. The claim Slick Willie would last throughout his presidency. His folksy manner led him to be nicknamed Bubba, especially in the South. Since 2000, he has frequently been referred to as the Big Dog or Big Dog. His prominent role in campaigning for President Obama during the 2012 presidential election and his widely publicized speech at the 2012 Democratic National Convention, where he officially nominated Obama and criticized Republican nominee Mitt Romney and Republican policies in detail, earned him the nickname Explainer-in-Chief. Clinton drew strong support from the African American community and insisted that the improvement of race relations would be a major theme of his presidency. In 1998, Nobel laureate Toni Morrison called Clinton the first black president, saying, "Clinton displays almost every trope of blackness: single-parent household, worn poor, working class, saxophone playing, McDonald's, and junk food-loving boy from Arkansas." Morrison noted that Clinton's sex life was scrutinized more than his career accomplishments, and she compared this to the stereotyping and double standards that, she said, blacks typically endure. Many viewed this comparison as unfair and disparaging both to Clinton and to the African American community at large. Clinton, a Baptist, has been open about his faith. Sexual assault and misconduct allegations. Alleged affairs. Clinton admitted to having extramarital affairs with singer Jennifer Flowers and Monica Lewinsky. Actress Elizabeth Grayson, Miss Arkansas winner Sally Perdue, and Dolly Kyle Browning all claimed that they had affairs with Clinton during his time as governor of Arkansas. Browning would later sue Clinton, Bruce Lindsay, Robert S. Bennett, and Jane Mayer, alleging they engaged in a conspiracy to attempt to block her from publishing a book loosely based on her relationship with Clinton and tried to defame him. However, Browning's lawsuit was dismissed. Post-presidency 2001-present. Bill Clinton has continued to be active in public life since leaving office in 2001, giving speeches, fundraising, and founding charitable organizations, and has spoken in prime time at every Democratic National Convention. Activities until 2008 campaign. In 2002, Clinton warned that preemptive military action against Iraq would have unwelcome consequences and later claimed to have opposed the Iraq War from the start, though some dispute this. In 2005, Clinton criticized the Bush administration for its handling of emissions control while speaking at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Montreal. The William J. Clinton Presidential Center and Park in Little Rock, Arkansas, was dedicated in 2004. Clinton released a best-selling autobiography, My Life, in 2004. In 2007, he released Giving: How Each of Us Can Change the World, which also became a New York Times bestseller and garnered positive reviews. In the aftermath of the 2004 Asian tsunami, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan appointed Clinton to head a relief effort. After Hurricane Katrina, Clinton joined with fellow former President George H.W. Bush to establish the Bush-Clinton Tsunami Fund in January 2005 and the Bush-Clinton-Katrina Fund in October of that year. As part of the tsunami effort, these two ex-presidents appeared in a Super Bowl XXXIX pregame show and traveled to the affected areas. They also spoke together at the funeral of Boris Yeltsin in April 2007. Based on his philanthropic worldview, Clinton created the William J. Clinton Foundation to address issues of global importance. This foundation includes the Clinton Foundation HIV and AIDS Initiative CHI, which strives to combat that disease and has worked with the Australian government toward that end. The Clinton Global Initiative CGI, begun by the Clinton Foundation in 2005. In 2005, Clinton announced through his foundation an agreement with manufacturers to stop selling sugary drinks in schools. Clinton's foundation joined with the Large Cities Climate Leadership Group in 2006 to improve cooperation among those cities, and he met with foreign leaders to promote this initiative. The foundation has received donations from many governments all over the world, including Asia and the Middle East. In 2008, Foundation Director Inder Singh announced deals to reduce the price of anti-malaria drugs by 30% in developing nations. Clinton also spoke in favor of California Proposition 87 on alternative energy, which was voted down. In the early 2000s, Clinton took flights on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet in connection with Clinton Foundation work. Years later, Epstein was convicted on sex trafficking charges. Clinton's office released a statement in 2019 saying, "President Clinton knows nothing about the terrible crimes Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to in Florida some years ago, or those with which he has been recently charged in New York." 2008 presidential election. During the 2008 Democratic presidential primary campaign, Clinton vigorously advocated on behalf of his wife, Hillary. Through speaking engagements and fundraisers, he was able to raise $10 million toward her campaign. Some worried that as an ex-president, he was too active on the trail, too negative to Clinton rival Barack Obama, and alienating his supporters at home and abroad. Many were especially critical of him following his remarks in the South Carolina primary, which Obama won. Later in the 2008 primaries, there was some infighting between Bill and Hillary's staffs, especially in Pennsylvania. Considering Bill's remarks, many thought he could not rally Hillary supporters behind Obama after Obama won the primary. Such remarks lead to apprehension that the party would be split to the detriment of Obama's election. Fears were allayed August 27, 2008, when Clinton enthusiastically endorsed Obama at the 2008 Democratic National Convention, saying all his experience as president assures him that Obama is ready to lead. After Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign was over, Bill Clinton continued to raise funds to help pay off her campaign debt. After the 2008 election. In 2009, Clinton traveled to North Korea on behalf of two American journalists imprisoned there. Una Lee and Laura Ling had been imprisoned for illegally entering the country from China. Jimmy Carter had made a similar visit in 1994. After Clinton met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, Kim issued a pardon. Since then, Clinton has been assigned many other diplomatic missions. He was named United Nations Special Envoy to Haiti in 2009 following a series of hurricanes, which caused $1 billion in damages. Clinton organized a conference with the Inter-American Development Bank where a new industrial park was discussed in an effort to build back better. In response to the 2010 Haiti earthquake, U.S. President Barack Obama announced that Clinton and George W. Bush would coordinate efforts to raise funds for Haiti's recovery. Funds began pouring into Haiti, which led to funding becoming available for Caracol Industrial Park in a part of the country unaffected by the earthquake. While Hillary Clinton was in South Korea, she and Cheryl Mills worked to convince SAA, a large apparel subcontractor, to invest in Haiti despite the company's deep concerns about plans to raise the minimum wage. In the summer of 2010, the South Korean company signed a contract at the U.S. State Department, ensuring that the new industrial park would have a key tenant. In 2010, Clinton announced support of and delivered the keynote address for the inauguration of NTR, Ireland's first environmental foundation. At the 2012 Democratic National Convention, Clinton gave a widely praised speech nominating Barack Obama. 2016 presidential election and after. During the 2016 presidential election, Clinton again encouraged voters to support Hillary and made appearances speaking on the campaign trail. In a series of tweets, then-President-elect Donald Trump criticized his ability to get people out to vote. Clinton served as a member of the Electoral College for the state of New York. He voted for the Democratic ticket consisting of his wife Hillary and her running mate Tim Kaine. On September 7, 2017, Clinton partnered with former Presidents Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama to work with One America Appeal to help the victims of Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma in the Gulf Coast and Texas communities. In 2020, post-presidential health concerns. In September 2004, Clinton underwent quadruple bypass surgery. In March 2005, he again underwent surgery, this time for a partially collapsed lung. On February 11, 2010, he was rushed to New York Presbyterian/Columbia Hospital in Manhattan after complaining of chest pains, and he had 2 coronary stents implanted in his heart. After this procedure, Clinton adopted a plant-based whole foods vegan diet, which had been recommended by doctors Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn. However, he has since incorporated fish and lean proteins at the suggestion of Dr. Mark Hyman, a proponent of the pseudoscientific ethos of functional medicine. As a result, he is no longer a strict vegan. In October 2021, Clinton was treated for sepsis at the University of California, Irvine Medical Center. Wealth, 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 wealth. The Clintons incurred several $1 million in legal bills during his presidency, which were paid off 4 years after he left office. Bill and Hillary Clinton have each earned millions of dollars from book publishing. In 2016, Forbes reported Bill and Hillary Clinton made about $240 million in the 15 years, from January 2001 to December 2015, mostly from paid speeches, business consulting, and book writing. Also in 2016, CNN reported the Clintons combined to receive more than $153 million in paid speeches from 2001 until spring 2015. In May 2015, The Hill reported that Bill and Hillary Clinton have made more than $25 million in speaking fees since the start of 2014, and that Hillary Clinton also made $5 million or more from her book. In July 2014, The Wall Street Journal reported that at the end of 2012, the Clintons were worth between $5 million and $25.05 million, and that in 2012, the last year, they were required to disclose the information the Clintons made between $16 and $17 million, mostly from speaking fees earned by Clinton earned more than $104 million from paid speeches between 2001 and 2012. In June 2014, ABC News and The Washington Post reported that Bill Clinton has made more than $100 million giving paid speeches since leaving public office, and in 2008, The New York Times reported that the Clintons' income tax returns show they made $109 million in the 8 years from January 1, 2000. Bill Clinton has given dozens of paid speeches each year since leaving office in 2001, mostly to corporations and philanthropic groups in North America and Europe. He often earned $100,000 to $300,000 per speech. Russian investment bank with ties to the Kremlin paid Clinton $500,000 for a speech in Moscow. Hillary Clinton said she and Bill came out of the White House financially broke and in debt, especially due to large legal fees incurred during their years in the White House. "We had no money when we got there, and we struggled to, piece together the resources for mortgages, for houses, for Chelsea's education." She added, "Bill has worked really hard." Personal life. At the age of 10, he was baptized at Park Place Baptist Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and remained a member of a Baptist church. In 2007, with Jimmy Carter, he founded the New Baptist Covenant Baptist Organization. On October 11, 1975, in Fayetteville, Arkansas, he married Hillary Rodham, whom he met while studying at Yale University. They had Chelsea Clinton, their only child, on February 27, 1980. He is the maternal grandfather to Chelsea's 3 children. Honors and recognition. Electoral history. Authored books. Putting People First: How We Can All Change America. New York, Three Rivers Press. September 12, 1992. ISBN 978-0-8129-2193-9. Between Hope and History. New York Times Books. 1996. ISBN 978-0-8129-2913-3. My Life First Ed. New York Vintage Books. 2004. ISBN 978-1-4000-3003-3. Giving How Each of Us Can Change the World. First Ed. First Ed. First Ed. First Ed. New York Knopf. 2007. ISBN 978-307-26674-3. Back to Workbook. First Ed. New York Knopf. 2011. ISBN 978-307-95975-975-1. The President is Missing. First Ed. Knopf. 2018. ISBN 978-0-316-41269-8. The President's Daughter. First Ed. Knopf. 2021. ISBN 978-0-316-54071-1. Recordings. Bill Clinton is one of the narrators on Wolf Tracks and Peter and the Wolf. This garnered Clinton the 2003 Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Album for Children. The audiobook edition of his autobiography, My Life, read by Clinton himself, won. Clinton has 2 more Grammy nominations for his audiobooks, Giving How Each of Us Can Change the World in 2007 and Back to Work in 2012.